Hello and welcome to Wilson Center Now, a production of the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. I'm John Molesky. My guest today is one of my favorites. Sharon Guynup joins us. Sharon is a journalist, a National Geographic explorer, and a global fellow with the Wilson Center. And as you'll learn during our discussion, the stories that we're going to be talking about intersect, and Sharon's been on this beat for quite some time. We're going to be talking both about the Tiger King and also about how that might relate to what's happening with the world's global pandemic that we're all locked down as a result of. Sharon, welcome. Great to see you, even under these trying circumstances.
Thank you so much for including me in this discussion, John. It's important information at this particular time and always.
And Sharon joins us from the New York City area, the epicenter of the outbreak here in the United States. So I know things have been a bit tense in your neighborhood.
Absolutely. I live on a street that has a hospital 6 blocks down, and frankly, the ambulances never stop. And it's a constant reminder of the true toll of what was a wildlife trade sparked pandemic.
Yeah. Well, Sharon, everyone's heard now of the Tiger King on Netflix, the 7-part series. It's almost a perfect storm. We're locked down, and so binge watching is the thing. And this is a program that's been trending. As soon as I saw it, my initial thought was, well, this is new to the world and to America and to Netflix viewers in many ways, but it's not new to Sharon Guynup, who's been on this beat for a long time. Let me first get your reaction to the series, which I know in things that you've written for National Geographic and the Washington Post and others, you make clear this is not a documentary. Your thoughts?
There's a couple of really important issues. Yes, this is not a documentary. This is, much more kind of reality TV, true crime. And the real losers are the tigers, because this series never addresses what the cub petting photo op tourist business truly is. And there's many aspects to that really deserve public consideration. And, I ticked through, what was not said in Tiger King, in a recent editorial in the Washington Post. And if you'd like, we could go through those.
Yes, absolutely. Please do.
So, first and foremost, we see cubs pulled from their mother directly after birth, literally with a metal hook, and dragged through the fence and carried off. But it's never said what happens to them next. They're then fed the wrong food. By 4 weeks old, they're passed around to hundreds or thousands of visitors for petting and photo ops. At 4 months, latest, they expire. They hit their expiration date. They're dumped, they're killed, they simply disappear. And the next crop goes to work. And, meanwhile, these venues, inventories never go up. And oversight by USDA, which, was mandated by Congress to enforce the Animal Welfare Act, which is basic care standards. USDA is purposefully not doing its job. From 2016 to 2018, enforcement dropped by 92%. 92%, I'll repeat that. So even enforcing basic standards that ensure not only animal welfare, animal safety, but public safety in terms of safe enclosures, disease transmission, other issues, that kind of enforcement has been replaced by what USDA leadership calls teachable moments, which are conversations instead of citations for violations. So, this is a highly unregulated industry, and there is no overall federal law regulating big cat ownership in the United States.
That's really mind-boggling. When you consider, give us the number, more tigers in captivity in the United States alone than exist in the wild in the entire world. That's hard to contemplate.
The thing that's fascinating is It doesn't matter who you're talking to. The estimates of how many tigers are living, in cages in the United States ranges from 5,000 to 10,000. That's a really broad estimate. And the fact that no one knows how many there are, including the government, points to the lack of oversight. I would like to talk about the law. It's strictly a patchwork of state laws regulating big cat ownership. In some states, including Oklahoma, where Joe Exotic Zoo is, it's still run by his business partner, still open and operating. Oklahoma has no state laws. So if you wanted to buy a tiger tomorrow and put it in your backyard, you could. You could buy 10 tigers and put it in your backyard, and there would be no inspection, no oversight whatsoever.
I can't adopt a kitten from the local shelter as easily as what you just described.
Absolutely. However, the Big Cat Public Safety Act has been introduced into both houses of Congress. It has enough support in the House to move forward. It has already gone through congressional budget review. It will only need to come up for a vote. Obviously, right now, there are other much more important priorities. I'm hoping it will come up for a vote fairly soon. It's slower in the Senate. It was introduced 6 months later in the Senate. But pretty much every country has some kind of federal legislation on the ownership of big, dangerous animals. And I think that's something that really needs to be considered here in the United States.
I know why, but I'm guessing many of our viewers don't know why you know so much about this. But you did 18 months of undercover work visiting these farms or these roadside attractions all over the country. Could you talk about that?
Well, I worked with photographer Steve Winter on an investigation for National Geographic magazine that ran in the December issue. We spent 18 months undercover, another 6 months, out, publicly announcing what we were doing and interviewing people. We saw egregious situations where, cubs were sick, they were skinny, they were screaming, passed around to people, 10, 12 hours a day in some situations. Really poor living conditions for adult and baby tigers. It was not a humane situation. And, there has been lots of investigation over the last number of years. The Humane Society of the United States, people for the ethical treatment of animals have really dug in and exposed what exactly it means to pull cubs from their mothers at birth, to force females to birth 2 to 3 litters a year instead of once every 2 years like they would in the wild. There's just a lot of issues there, but there's also a public safety issue. Many of these roadside zoos have caging that far too low. The fences are far too low. They're not appropriate second layer fencing to protect the public. And when something goes wrong, who gets the call? Some of the strongest lobbies for the Big Cat Public Safety Act have actually come from first responders. Think about now in the era of climate change amped storms. A tornado blows through, a hurricane blows through, blows down fences. There's 20 or 50 tigers running around. Who gets the call? I have a quote from a letter that was written to Congress by Marine and former FBI bomb expert Edmund Kelso Jr., who described the danger. Quote, "If I had the choice of working on an IED or responding to an emergency involving a dangerous big cat, I would definitely select the former. This should underscore how dangerous it truly is for these animals to be left in untrained hands in backyards and roadside zoos."
Yeah, an IED, an improvised explosive device.
Absolutely.
So, and this isn't just theoretical, right? We've had these big cats escape and local authorities have to hunt them down.
Yes, it's happened. It was briefly mentioned in Tiger King. The most dangerous situation to date happened in Zanesville, Ohio. It's known as the Zanesville Massacre because 56 animals got loose. 38 of those were big cats, and the sheriff department had to go out and shoot them. And meanwhile, they were running around not far from a school, not far from residential settlements. I mean, this was on the edge of a suburban rural land in Zanesville. So yes, these are dangerous animals. They're top predators. The tigers are the largest of the big cats.
And they're not just photo ops for selfies for self-indulgent tourists. Yeah, it really is a crazy situation. And what I want to ask you from a personal point of view, for someone who has been not just involved in covering these majestic creatures in the wild, but also covering the illicit trade that the Tiger King story is part of, what it's like to see suddenly all the attention given to this story when it's been on your radar screen for a long time.
I'm hoping that Tiger King continues to open these kinds of discussions. I think our consciousness as a culture about the way we treat and use wild animals continues to evolve in very positive ways. And although Tiger King didn't dig into many of the issues we've discussed here and others, it has opened conversations. So I'm grateful for the chance to put these issues back on the table, and not just because of the situation here in the US. It's also an issue with global implications. Because the US has such an unregulated situation with captive tigers here in the US, we have no voice on the world stage to impact the conservation of the last 4,000 wild tigers. And think about that number, 4,000. There are 5 subspecies, so it's not even 4,000. It's split among 5 subspecies. There's very few wild tigers left. And the US has had a very powerful conservation voice on other kinds of wildlife conservation. But when it comes to tigers, we have no credibility. Now, tigers are mostly trafficked in an Asian market, very high-end black market trade, mostly for skins, bones for tiger bone wine, as well as teeth and claws and other parts, some of it for traditional medicine. Much of it is for high-end prestige products. Some of those tigers are sourced from actual farms in China, in Thailand, Laos, and Vietnam, where tigers are raised and grown for their parts and products, which contravenes a decision by an international treaty, the Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, which is signed by 183 countries, which states that tigers should not be farmed or raised for commercial reasons for parts and products. Now, if we have such an unregulated situation here, it gives cover to countries that are truly farming tigers. So, our lack of regulation and control here in this country is actually contributing to the demise of the last wild tigers.
And we've been focused on tigers for obvious reasons, but as I've learned from you over the years, animals like the pangolin and other exotic beasts are also subject to these kinds of abuses. Can you connect the dots for us of where this illicit trade and the types of products, and in some cases, the types of eating habits, connect to the global pandemic that we're involved in now, the types of risks involved in these types of endeavors?
Well, the illegal international wildlife trade is global. There is no country on the planet that is not either a consumer or an export country. It's illegal. there's many aspects to this trade. It's not only a biodiversity issue that, these animals are being poached into extinction, and thousands of species, not just the ones that we hear about, the elephants, the rhinos, the tigers, little known animals we didn't ever hear about until now, like the pangolin, which is thought to have been the interim host species for the coronavirus, for COVID-19. But it's thousands of species that are disappearing across the globe for consumption as meat, as traditional medicine products, trinkets, all kinds of products, tourist trinkets, pets. So every one of those animals then leaves a problematic niche in the ecosystem it inhabits. This trade is masterminded by international cartels. So this trade presents serious national security issues across the globe and has been raised from status of an environmental issue to a national security issue in most countries, including the United States. And it obviously presents very serious public health threats, which is where we are now. When I looked at the Worldometer statistics this morning, there's been 1.6 million documented cases, which is a gross, underreporting because there's been so little testing across the globe, and especially here in the United States, as well as many other countries.
Australian health minister guesses that could be 10 times that number.
Absolutely. And there's been almost 100,000 deaths to date, and meanwhile, numbers are still going up. However, this isn't news. SARS was a coronavirus. Ebola and HIV are zoonotic diseases. Zoonotic diseases jump between species from wildlife, livestock to humans. And there have been experts sounding the alarm about that danger of putting animals from all over the globe in cages together on top of each other, some of them being slaughtered, and all of them, sharing germs, for various maladies that no one has immunity to. And in this case, humans did not have immunity to COVID-19.
So I want to see if we might end on a hopeful note, but we won't fake it, right? What do you think? Is this perfect storm, the undeniable, unprecedented impact of this global pandemic we're living through as we speak to each other from our homes, not a typical place where we might be for this type of conversation? And this is just the most minor of the impacts that people are experiencing. And then I won't underestimate the pop culture aspect where a program like Tiger King becomes this phenomenon. Is there a storm building where finally the kind of focus and kind of serious attention to these issues could emerge as part of the silver lining from this dark cloud that we're experiencing?
I think as a result of this pandemic, a situation where every country in the world is affected. Unlike a war, unlike a localized natural disaster, this is an entire planetary disaster, pandemic. Everyone is now aware of the fact that wildlife trade, in the way it has been conducted illegally across the globe, presents serious dangers. And if we're going to prevent this in the future, we have to change consumption of wildlife. This particular virus originated purportedly in a market in China that sold both seafood and wildlife species. But it's not just China or Asia. HIV and Ebola originated in Africa from consumption of primates. Again, this isn't just China. It's not just Asia. The illegal international wildlife trade is a global problem that we need to address as a planet. And I think there will be very serious international pressure to do so. And there has to be, because we can't let this happen again. Just one example, in many outbreaks, Ebola has killed 95% of the people it's infected. The reason Ebola hasn't killed off humans on the planet is because it doesn't live long in the environment. It doesn't live on surfaces for days as COVID-19 can. We may not be so lucky next time. So I'm really hoping that governments around the globe will make a concerted effort to change the way we enforce wildlife trafficking and make it a very, very serious national priority.
Well, thank you for your contributions to this discussion, this very important discussion. You know as well as I do that headlines and trend lines don't always converge, and sometimes the things that we're talking about are really not the most important stories. This story is clearly important, and you've been on top of it for a long time. Sharon, thank you for joining us. Wishing you and yours continued good health as we ride this disaster out.
Be safe and be well, and thank you so much for the conversation, John.
Thanks. And if you'd like to hear more from Sharon Guynup, of course, WilsonCenter.org under the Environmental Change and Security Program has Sharon's work, Washington Post, National Geographic, lots of places to find her good work. We hope you enjoyed this edition of Wilson Center Now and that you'll be joining us again soon. Throughout this disaster, we'll continue to be bringing you the kind of content that you rely on the Wilson Center for. And we'll be back with more. Until then, for all of us at the Wilson Center, I'm John Molesky. Thanks for watching.